In times like these, we need faith that's victorious, and you can walk in it. Welcome to Victorious Faith with Pastor Mark Cowart.
Hello and welcome to Victorious Faith broadcast. I am so delighted today. I'm with my dear friend, Bishop Joshua Lwere from Uganda. Bishop Joshua, welcome to the broadcast again.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, at the time of this taping, you just arrived in last night from Uganda.
Sure.
And I was just with you a few weeks ago in Uganda. And I just have to say this is going to be an incredible couple of weeks. And as I've shared with you, Bishop Joshua, I believe Uganda is a miracle nation.
Right.
I think, you know, the people that do know anything about Uganda, the first thing you're going to hear is Idi Amin.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about some things that we in America can learn from how the body of Christ is risen up in Uganda and totally push back the forces of darkness. And light has come up and the nation has been transformed. So these broadcasts will be available. That information will be on your screen. If you would like to get these, I know they're going to be an inspiration to a lot of pastors.
Right.
We believe that the key is in the ministers, in the pastors in America. In our founding, you know this well, they were called the Black Robe Regiment.
Yes.
And no matter how big the great British Empire was at the time, they got a hold of God and the spirit of faith, and the Lord birthed this nation. So that is available, that's on your screen. And then what I believe is the cornerstone message of Bishop Joshua when I had first met you, which is probably 2010, and just in that period, the Lord revealed to you the message about altars and thrones.
Right.
It riveted my life. And so those are available. As I shared, that was before any gray hair had come into the... So if you want to see the bishop with no gray hair, it's on this DVD series, but it's Profound Revelation. So thank you so much for being with us. I just cherish our time. When we had you on the last time, we got a lot of comments about the discussion. And we prayed just before we started. We really want the Lord to have his way with this. Sure. But tell us about Uganda, because you are a miracle. And there was a story when a Botes man came to your village and killed many of your family. And they had you and they were ready to cut your throat. And a man walked up and said, let that one go. And I found that out as we were driving down the road one day. We were going. You showed me and you started telling me your story. And I said, amazing. So tell us about Uganda. Just give us an overview of the history.
Uganda is located in East Africa. It's one of the East African nations, together with Kenya, Tanzania. Now we have South Sudan, we have DRC, we have other nations like Somalia.
And the DRC is the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Congo, sure. Then we have Rwanda. And then Burundi. You've heard about what happened in Rwanda, the genocide and all that. So this is where Uganda is located. It was the Intercastoran region where there was a very big kingdom called Bunyoro Kingdom, Bunyoro Kitara Kingdom. Before that, there was the Chwezi dynasty. These are many centuries ago. I'm not going to that, but they disintegrated into these small kingdoms, including one of Buganda, where I come from, where the name Uganda comes from. The British could not pronounce Buganda, so they pronounced it as Uganda.
So they dropped the B.
They dropped the B, and then finally it became the name for these 56 tribes now, coming together as one nation. And that was in 1890. Earlier than that, in 1877, on 30th of June to be exact, the first British missionaries came to Uganda, Anglican. And then on February 17th, 1879, the Roman Catholic. So they started to, our king opened up to them. And he said, I want my nation to be, he didn't call it discipling, but he said, I want my nation, we are in darkness, we need light. So he literally wrote to the Queen in England and said, send people to teach my people.
Now, when you say they were in darkness, you're talking witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
Very steeped in witchcraft. So there was no gospel really prior to that?
No.
Okay.
Before that, the Muslims had come from the east. The Arabs had come trading 1844. But then in 1877, about 30 years later, Stanley from the Royal Geographical Society is traveling. A traveler finds this kingdom very organized, and the people respectful. So the king said, he's looking at a white man and said, then he told him about the only true God. So the king said, I think I and my people are in darkness. We need light. You mean there is one great God? He said, yes. These many small gods you're worshiping are not the true God. He said, then I and my people are in darkness. We need that light. Let me write to your queen to send me people, teachers, to teach my people. Now that was unusual. They had never seen that anywhere. So Stanley in 1872 wrote back to the king, and they sent the first missionaries. So that's how Uganda becomes known, because it was put in the newspapers, in Telegraph in England, that there's this dark continent in Africa where we found a king who is like a fish saying, come and fish me. They had never seen that. So they sent the missionaries, 8 of them, 6 died, almost all of 4 died, 2 survived, 2 remained. So it was very dark.
What year difficult. Was that in?
1877.
Wow, so England sent missionaries, and 4 of the
4
6
died,
or 8 died?
2 were taken back very sick, 2 remained.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was because of the malaria. Malaria was a tropical disease which they didn't know how to handle. So many of them died of malaria. Yeah, because they were walking through forests from the coast. They came all the way to the coast of Mombasa, and then they had to walk all the way inland. So that was why many of them died. So that's how we get these few missionaries arriving, just 2 arriving. To the king's court, and then they were introduced, and from that moment they start to teach. They introduce writing and reading. They start to translate the Bible into the local language, Luganda. That's how Luganda becomes more spoken than other languages, because it's the language of instruction at that time. They start to teach.
And that's your language,
that's
right?
The language,
Luganda.
yeah. So that's how Uganda starts. So in 1890, the politicians also come in. So the missionaries come first.
Did they actually bring the gospel?
Yeah, the missionaries brought the gospel. Wow. But then there were others who were more interested in, the British were also interested in extending their kingdom. The two were not somehow connected, but what the British would do, where the gospel would go, they would also send their men, like this Captain Lugard, he was called Captain Lugard, came in. For him, he was about to minerals, about where can we get this, where can we get that. So they came in and decided to come with the gun and take over the place. So that's how we become a British colony. But when they came, the king said, no, you can't do this. They asked him, what is your kingdom? He said, my kingdom, all the people, all the houses, all the forests, all the rivers. So this guy is very wise. So they just made an agreement and made it a protectorate instead of a colony. So all the other nations were colonized, Uganda wasn't. It was, instead, we said, okay, we'll protect you. So we become a British protectorate. And for those next 70 years, the British are in charge. And so in 1962, we get our independence from the British after, the Second World War. Your president, Roosevelt, insisted demanded that the British release their colonies. We are not going to beat Germany unless you accept that after this war, we allow nations to have freedom. So that was the agreement between Churchill and Roosevelt in the Canadian waters. That's what brings us our independence.
Now I have a question, because most people, I would dare say, like, Uganda's been called the Pearl of Africa, which was a quote from Winston Churchill.
Yes.
Why did he say that?
Because when he flew in, He found a very, very beautiful country, beautiful rivers, minerals, everything was so beautiful. It was all green. He had never seen anything like that. In Uganda, you put a seed anywhere and it will just germinate. The soils are very fertile. The land is all green. The rivers, the whole country is crisscrossed by rivers. And so that's why he called it the Pearl of Africa. Very beautiful. The nature, the fauna, the animals. We have the mountain gorillas, the only place where they're found now in the
last
world.
Probably surviving of the silverbacks.
Yeah.
And I think that's the Bwindi impenetrable force. People come from all over the world there
to see them.
And I remember one day we were at one of the lodges, and you see the British there. You can tell the British were there. We were out having lunch one day and looking over the Nile, and I was thinking how beautiful.
Yes.
And there were these Europeans next to us with these cameras with lenses this long.
Yeah.
And I find out bird watchers come from all over the world.
We have the biggest number of birds in the whole world, the biggest number of birds, every kind of bird.
It is a beautiful, and then there's Murchison Falls where the Nile comes down to about 23-foot wide opening.
Exactly.
Drops 150 feet. And they have a marking, Ernest Hemingway. It was where his airplane crashed.
Yeah.
And there's a marking on the side of that.
Exactly.
The wildlife. So it is definitely, and I don't know that Winston Churchill was a Christian when he said that.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't a Christian. I don't think he died a Christian, the way we call a born-again Christian, but he looked at the beauty of the country.
Yes.
He had never seen anything like that.
And when I was in Uganda with you recently, we spoke to a group of people, and I talked, just shared from my heart, but I thought about there was a parallel spiritually that a pearl is a result of great pain in the oyster.
Fire,
Yeah. And
our
Uganda
pearl has gone through that exactly.
Yes.
So after the British leave, that's after independence, very shortly, that was 1962 when we got our independence. 4 years later, civil wars started. Remember, 56 tribes coming together to become one nation. For the first time, they have one of their own being a leader. Before that, they have been ruled by foreigners, and many of them, these tribes have been forced. The kingdoms came together not because they willingly wanted to unite. They were fighting all along before the British came. Now they have to become one nation. So that was the cause of the Civil War. When one leader is in power, other tribes, we have 4 major divisions, the Bantu, then the Nilotic, the Nilo-Hamitic, and so you can see those different groupings and dialects. So because of that caused a lot of civil wars.
And fast forwarding, this is where it really gets interesting and we see the hand of God. So we met probably around 2010.
Yeah, 2011, I think.
2010, 2011, somewhere in there. But in 2012, that was the 50th anniversary, the Jubilee of independence from Great Britain. So you have President Museveni, and the country has prospered under him. And the church has risen up. Someone told me the story when he called the pastors together, maybe in the 90s, handed them the Ugandan flag,
that's right,
and said, I am putting this nation
into your hands,
into the hands of the Christians. Now, this is profound because that's incredible.
That was a key.
It was a key.
Why? Because Idi Amin, when he became president on the 25th of January 1971, taking over from Obote, who was before him, he declared Uganda a Muslim nation. And he told all the other Muslims that this is a Muslim nation and I want to Islamize the whole country. Some of our people were arrested, were stopped from praying. He said, I only allow the traditional religions to remain. Anglicans, Roman Catholics, and Orthodox. The rest were all banned. So if they found you praying, you'd be arrested, and many were killed. Others were maimed, thrown into prison. All our churches were closed. It says to those ones, I allowed them to stay because they are traditional religions, but all the others are agents of the Americans. They thought the Pentecostals, Baptists, he said those are agents of Americans and CIA.
So they weren't allowed to meet.
No, they were arrested. So they went underground, prayed, fasted. So the prayer movement was born during that Idi Amin's time.
That's Pastor Deo said. He goes,
taught us to pray.
Yeah, Pastor Deo Masoki, who's over all the prayer under Bishop Joshua, he said that Idi Amin taught you to pray. And I said, what?
Yeah.
And he said, we had to go to the hills to pray. We had to be underground to pray.
Yeah.
But it drove, and there's some parallels going on in America right now. America's had the first little taste of tyranny. It's soft tyranny, but it's tyranny nonetheless through COVID.
Barely anything like we experienced.
Oh, they killed people.
Oh, they killed our pastors. They maimed some. They raped. They had to pray. God actually protected so many pastors' wives from being raped and all the things. The miracles after miracles during Idi Amin's time. So during his reign, the church, he decided to wipe it out and declare Uganda a Muslim nation. He took that biggest hill and said, this is where we're going to put the biggest mosque.
And wasn't it Muammar Gaddafi that funded it? It's one of the biggest there is.
Yeah. But then he declared it by force. So after Museveni came into power, current president, we told him, look, this country was dedicated initially to God. Why was it forced? We were forced as a nation into the Muslim thing. We are not part of the Muslim nations. 85% are Christians. He said, so he took the flag of the nation and handed it over to the pastors. I said, I'm giving it back to the Christian faith because you own this country. The foundations of this nation are Christian.
And that's why President Museveni did that.
Yeah, he did that. 85%.
When was that he did it?
That is 1990.
1990. Was
about 1990 something, 96. Yeah, about 10 years in his leadership.
Was Alex Matala a part of that meeting? Maybe?
Yes,
when he did?
many number. Apostle John Mulinde, I don't think you know him. He organized a big meeting, invited the president, explained the situation, and then the president said, "You are sure?" So he gave it back.
This is so profound because I'm making all these connections. So in America, we were given President Donald Trump, and the church, many of the Christians reluctant because it didn't fit their mold of what a president ought to be. He was the greatest friend to the church and did more for religious liberty. So what I see is the Ugandan Christians took that opportunity and walked through that door. But something, to me, earth-shaking.
That is key. The key is every time God raises leaders are not perfect, certainly. Political leaders may not have the values that we certainly have, but we see from history and the Bible that God always uses leaders. Take an example of Cyrus and many others in the Bible. Even Nebuchadnezzar, he used him to bring judgment on the Jews, but he says, "He's my servant." Why? Because he's accomplishing a specific purpose. And God is so key. He will move heaven and earth to make sure his word does not fall on the ground. And that is so critical because at any given time, when God raises a leader for a purpose, it is the church and the prophets. The church is the prophet of the nation. The church has to be sensitive to what God is doing. For example, at that time, Jeremiah's greatest problem was believers who could not see that even though Babylon was now being used to judge the nation of Israel, the people of God, they had to work with God. They had to collaborate with God. Because when you fight what God is doing, you are fighting the blessing. So Jeremiah told them, "My servant Nebuchadnezzar." They could not understand how.
Tell us about Nebuchadnezzar. Was he a great Christian type individual?
He's an idolater. And in chapter 27 of Jeremiah, other nations have come together. They have a summit with Zedekiah, who is the king. The king of Israel has brought other neighbors. They are now talking about how they can join hands to fight Nebuchadnezzar. And God speaks to Jeremiah and says, Go tell those people and the ambassadors, foreign ministers of foreign affairs who have come meeting in Jerusalem, what they are doing is detrimental to their countries. It is my will and purpose that Nebuchadnezzar rules. I have given him the beasts of the field. We need to read that passage. It's very interesting. And because God's purposes for nations are so critical and important for the church to sense, to realize, and then work with God, because if you don't, you are no prophet. And Jeremiah's major problem wasn't even non-believers. It was the people of God who could not understand what God is doing at that time. It's so critical.
That was America.
And for us we take that seriously, because we've not had necessarily very godly leaders before. But it was important for us to take hold of what God is giving us now and maximize it. To take what God is giving us, maximize it. Very, very important. Look at what he says in Jeremiah 27. Jeremiah 27. Early in the reign of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. This is what the Lord said. Maybe read, your accent is much better than mine.
Which, okay.
For the people who are listening.
Okay.
Verse 2.
So this is what the Lord said to me: make a yoke out of straps and crossbars and put it on your neck. Then send word to the kings of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon, through the envoys who have come to Jerusalem, to Zedekiah, king of Judah.
Notice how many nations have sent envoys. They are now in Jerusalem. They are sitting to strategize how to fight Nebuchadnezzar off.
And really, they end up fighting against God.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making here. So they are ready to fight. They are setting up their armies, and so the King Zedekiah of Judah is the host. So God is sending message, okay?
Give them a message for their masters and say, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Tell this to your masters. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anyone I please.
Yes. He doesn't consult us. He doesn't seek our permission. He just does it.
Now I will give all your countries into the hands of my servant Nebuchadnezzar.
Now notice that. He calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant.
And he was an idolater.
Idolater. One time, he made an idol and he forced people to worship it. That's the one he's calling now my servant Nebuchadnezzar. My servant Nebuchadnezzar.
King of Babylon.
Yeah.
And I will make even the wild animals subject to him.
Everything. It's me who gives.
Whew.
Nobody, I don't consult anybody. I choose leaders. Very key. God chooses leaders. And he decides who he chooses, at what time, when, how. Okay?
He says all nations will serve him, and his son and his grandsons, until the time for his land comes.
Yeah.
Then many nations and great kings will subjugate him.
Now, when you study, there were 5 regimes after Nebuchadnezzar. Nerigal, Marduk, and so on. We end with Belshazzar, because the book of Daniel doesn't show those ones who are in the middle, but there were 5. And Belshazzar is the one he's referring to here. And he's saying, then his grandson, until his time for his land comes, his grandson is the one, Belshazzar. Because Belshazzar was son of Nabonidus, who had married his daughter's wife, his Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, Nicritis. And so God is exact. His grandson, it is the time of his grandson that I'll take away the kingdom from his line.
Wow.
So
we're getting down to the end, but look, this is incredible.
Yeah.
He says, if, however, any nation or kingdom will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, or bow its neck under his yoke, I will punish that nation.
Who is going to punish?
Woo.
God himself. God himself. I will punish that nation with the sword, with the famine, with the plague, declares the Lord, until I destroy it by his hand. Nebuchadnezzar.
Wow.
So,
So do not listen to your prophets. Woo.
These are the prophets against Jeremiah. Jeremiah was declared God's will.
And they were not prophesying.
Yeah.
So do not listen to your prophets, your diviners, your interpreters of dreams, your mediums, your sorcerers, who tell you, quote, you will not serve the king of Babylon. They prophesy lies to you that will only serve to remove you far from your lands. I will banish you and you will perish.
Look at the next verse.
Wow. But if any nation will bow its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will let that nation remain in its own land.
So do you see how many nations sometimes vanish because they have refused to submit
to the Lord.
To the Lord.
And his chosen appointed leaders. Because it didn't fit what they wanted. Which would probably go, and we're out of time already today. This is
so that's why during President Museveni's reign, we knew that now we needed to position ourselves as the church. First and foremost, there were people who wanted our churches to continue to be banned. He said, no, why should I ban these people? I want to give them freedom.
God used him.
Yeah. So we said, okay, that is number one. Number two, we said, but why did Idi Amin declare this a Muslim nation? It isn't. A Muslim says, sure. So he gives us the flag. And you see, leaders are so keen in God's plan. When a leader does something, the nation has done it. That's why if you had a godly king in Israel, in Judah, the whole nation will be blessed.
We're out of time, Bishop Joshua. We're going to pick up tomorrow, though, right where we left off. You have said something so profound. Listen, thank you for being with us. This is going to be the most powerful 2 weeks.
Yes.
And this is specifically applying to America. So I want to thank you for joining us. Do not miss these broadcasts. They're available if you'd like to purchase them. And make sure to join us tomorrow. We're going to pick up right where we left off. This is profound right here. And I think it's exactly what's happened in America. But God has his hand on us. Thanks for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at this same time. Till then, may the Lord's richest blessings be yours.
Most Christians firmly agree our nation is on a dangerous trajectory. The alarm's been sounded, and God is awakening his people. Order your copy of this new teaching today at markcowart.org or call us at 1-800-590-4764.
We are more aware than ever that we all should be involved with the things that are facing our society. The Culture Impact Team exists to educate, equip, and mobilize the church to be involved with issues that affect our families, our faith, and our freedom. To learn more, you can check out cultureimpact.us.